As Ash faces Whitney begins as Whitney sends out her MP Pond to battle, and noticing this MP Pond seems to be a much more higher level than Ash could clearly see, and sending out the big guns as he sends out Aerodactyl to battle. And unfortunately for Whitney, as Aerodactyl being a very ancient Pokemon, is pretty much using not just his instincts as a Pokemon, but like as Ash also has his backup eyes, allowing for Aerodactyl to easily pick up Apipon. As even though Apipon seems to be a very high level Pokemon and able to do some major damage, but unfortunately, as Ash is more experienced Pokemon, is able to almost overpower. But there is one mistake that once again is as unfortunately as Ash and Aerodactyl seems to be uninstinctive to get together, meaning that they make a few mistakes and not to be. It's kind of the opposite of at being in the battle in unison because it's clearly not happening to them as Attack is making few mistakes and getting as more and more frustrated, which leads to more of cooperation between them. As Whitney is the one taking this advantage by using powerful focus punch, leaving Aerodactyl to take more damage than expected. And Ash is simply muttered to himself, "It's happening again, what is going on?" As luckily as Aerodactyl managed to pick up a win by using a powerful ancient power by knocking Apipon out of the battle, forcing Whitney to realizing that she is facing up a much more higher level challenge than expected, meaning that she could go all out if she really wanted to, as she simply sending out Giraffe to battle as the normal Spectre enters the battlefield as this time, luckily thanks to its psychic abilities, able to give an Aerodactyl and Ash a better challenger than expected because the April's most of its tackles doesn't seem to harm the ancient Pokemon, but Giraffic Psychic type seems to give an Aerodactyl a proper challenge, but there is still one mistake as Ash and Aerodactyl are beginning to battle in the battlefield normally, but again it begins a restart again. As the moment Ash and Aerodactyl had a mess couple cooperation, leading to a spot advantage which allows for Jeffrey to actually knock out Aerodactyl with the power of a psychic attack, leaving Ash to be very disappointed and beginning to stare at his Pokemon what is happening as Ash is beginning to think much more clearly. This is happening just like Venusaur and everyone else. And even Lapras for a time, maybe it's because something is happening between me and my older Pokemon, as I could notice that it doesn't seem to affect his newer Pokemon, which Ash unfortunately has to deal with that later, but unfortunately as he's busy in a Pokemon battle, having no other choice but to send out Swine up to battle as the baby Pokemon is sent out and immediately is frightened against the much more stronger Pokemon as Swine quickly goes behind Ash's leg and Ash is beginning to get a bit annoyed but managed to get wide enough to get him to not be afraid as Swine swiftly goes back in the battle and Whitney seems to see this to be very cute, which just gets very angry from Ash because they are completely serious. As on the other hand, Swinub is pretty much terrified, and once the battle begins, as Giraffe is simply too much for Swinub. As clearly the difference between a Swinub is just getting comfortable in practice battles, but facing actual opponent is beginning to actually terrify Swinub to the point where it actually affected Ash and him to effectively do anything in the battle, as Sawyer could only do powerful Icy Wind that is enough to slow down Giraffe, but unfortunately, as Giraffe just uses a powerful Storm, knocking out Swinub, forcing Ash to recall Swinub, but also gave so much praises for being a very encouraging Pokemon. As Ash realized that he doesn't want to lose, And so it really hits him like he could actually lose if he doesn't take the stairs, as he wanted to send out Caesar, but is completely horrified that the previous events with Arachnida might happen again. So he sends out Quilava instead, and this time as Quilava is taking advantage from Giraffe's lower speed thanks to Swinup's icy wing, allowing for Quilava to knock out the Giraffe Pokemon with a powerful flame wheel. As Witness simply smokes and recalls Giraffe and sending out her most terrified Pokemon Tank as the battle truly begins as Ash does do some major damage with powerful flame wheels after wave clears. But unfortunately, the moment as Miltank uses Roll Out as Quilava is unfortunately taking majority of the attack, and after that as Miltank just simply use Milk Drain to refresh its health, allowing it to go back on the battlefield. As Ash quickly commands for Quilava to use Flame Wheel but attack it in the opposite direction of Miltank's spin tail as Quilava spins around, but unfortunately as Miltank ditches the rollout and uses a powerful storm, knocking Quilava out of its move as it begins to crash to the ground as Miltank just stops it and continues with a powerful rollout as this move to pretty much knock out Quilava, leaving Ash to be lost in Johto for the first time in so many years that he can't even remember the last time he lost in a gym battle. As Ash is beginning to get very frustrated as he recalls Quilava back to Pokemon. Once it's Cassie's turn to battle Whitney, and as she is pretty much experiencing the same thing as Ash, but even worse because she doesn't have a particular strong Pokemon on her team, as majority of her Pokemon are really struggling against these normal type Pokemon, and especially Miltank, which seemingly is a very powerful Pokemon that Ash may underestimate it, and trying to analyze how he could approach this. He could obviously try to recall back his older Pokemon for this, but after having some hiccups with Venusaur and Aerodactyl, as Ash is beginning to process, there is something wrong with him and with his older Pokemon as he just pulls out Aerodactyl, thinking to himself, maybe it's because I have changed something that affected my other Pokemon, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. But what he could do is try to focus on his newest team, as they obviously are underpowered and underdeveloped. As Ash realizing he's really using a lot of his older Pokemon and pretty much foregoing his newer ones. As Ash had made up his mind as once Miltank pretty much destroys Bailey with a powerful rollout, as Casey has no way of really any chance against me. And after her battle, as they go back to the Pokemon Center, as Ash is indeed complicated, as he decided that he's going to battle Whitney in a later date, which kind of surprises Casey. She thought that Ash immediately wants a rematch, but Ash just simply said it happened to him before when he battled against Sabrina, the psychic type gym in Kanto, as it's clearly that that trainer seems to be overwhelming against him. So he decided that he's going to challenge Whitney in a later date, as Ash could just simply go for the next gym leader and not wanting to leave behind, as Cassidy is pretty much relying on Ash's experience throughout the journey, and she just simply follows along. But there's one quick thing he needed to do, as he goes to the Pokemon Professor and asks him to take care of Aerodactyl, as he simply sends away Aerodactyl, as Professor is happy to receive it and also asks something to Ash very important. Why did he just drop his Pokemon Venusaur in such a hurry? And Ash has to apologize to the older man because he just had a rough day that day, and right now he knows that for a fact there's something wrong with him and his other Pokemon, and isn't sure why. But it seems like the Professor Oak seems to calm down the boy as throughout his journey, the things that does happen to him and his Pokemon, but they find out they will deal with it together. And Ash will go back to back to the old friends again, as they simply hang out, unsure what Ash is thinking what's Venus is doing right now. As we see Venus's perspective as he's been sent up by Professor Oak and wanting to ask the grass type what is Ash has been up to lately, but seems that Venus is reluctant to tell anything to the professor and just simply turns away just by him mentioning Ash's trainer. It seems like Professor could analyze the grass type and seems to be very angry and disappointed, not particularly upset against Ash, but clearly his attitude recently seems to affect Venus so in a way. And for the few days, and Venus is adjusting to Professor O's lab and not really used to being outside in a while because he's been with Ash for the longest that he's not even sure how to adjust. But luckily, Venusaur had friends in the lab, as many of Ash's older Pokemon is willing to help Venusaur how to adjust back into this new habitat, trying to find food and water and where to locate his friend. And even them are asking what has been their trainer been up to lately, but they again as Venusaur to simply returns the same way that Professor Oak tried to ask him for something. But what Venusaur does telling them that their trainer has changed slightly, and not the way that they all want them. Try as they feel a bit very anxiety and kinda wanting to see the trainer, but they have to wait or call them when they needed him. But for a few days, as Venusaur has adjusted in life and finding out there's a huge cause against in the lab where water and grass type Pokemon are similarly are fighting, as Venusaur simply stops the huge fighting with its powerful Giga Drain into the air, which causes the two Pokemon sides to calm down, which gets Professor Oak's attention, and not to mention Tracy, as they're finding out that this is a pretty exciting discovery as Venusaur simply is being a guardian over the lab and wanting to see what happens next as they just simply watch over Venusaur, how he is going to deal with this huge fight, as Venusaur simply is knowing what's been going on because the lab has a finite of resources, finding out that they need a large amount of water as the water Pokemon seems to really take a lot of space in the lake, and Vince are finding a great idea how to approach this as he recalls his friends over the lab, particularly Venusaur's friends around the lab, like Primeape and Arcanine, for example, are helping out as they seemingly are digging for something and making Professor Oak and Tracy soon unsure what they're trying to do, as they quickly realize that Professor Oak is having a realization they're building a new lake for the grass type Pokemon to hang out so they don't have to fight over for the water Pokemon, as they manage to do so as this huge fight simply calms down and is much more easier around than the last. Professor has a fascinating idea as Venusaur is becoming some sort of protector and guardian over the forest and could easily stop any fights between the lab, as Venusaur might be a great occlusion to the lab, but isn't too sure how Ash is going to feel about this. As we plan out to Ash and Casey, as Ash and Casey are still continue to travel throughout Johto, as Ash seems to be done, and Casey wants to simply ask why, but Ash is reluctant to say anything to Casey. But the interruption was caused by a Pokemon, in particular in the bushes, as both trainers of course want to find out if it's a Pokemon, and their instinct was correct to find out a dumb spot as they use the Pokedex and finding out that these types of species seems to be very rare and making as very interesting of the Pokemon. As Cassidy of course also wants to try to capture it, but when they find out that Dunsparce is a very hard Pokemon to capture, as they sent out their Johto starters Squirrel and Bale, as the two trainers are beginning to have a rivalry trying to catch the Dunsparce, but mostly fighting each other most of the time because they're trying to capture first. But as Dunsparce is also not making this any easier for both trainers, as the Dunsparce just simply uses powerful ancient power to stop the corruption of any move. But unfortunately, as Ash's experience is beginning to play as he commanded for Quilava to jump in the rocks project as a platform to jump, and as Quilava listens to its trainer as it does a powerful flame wheel, you jumping the rocks that Dunspa is summoning, as well as Lava manages to strike it first and managing to capture the Dunspa pretty easy as Ash is beginning to get out of that funk that he's been having and noticing that he's being a bit more cheerful as Cassidy is very disappointed that she didn't get to catch it, but seeing that Ash is more happy makes her pretty happy as well. As Ash and Cassidy have been traveling around for a few days now and finally met their destination in the gym later. But unfortunately the gym itself seems to be closed down, making both trainers quite annoyed that they really wanted to battle and of course have to wait until it's open again. But there are some rumors around that there's a bunch of trainers be in this town in particular. That there are rumors that Suicune, the legendary Pokemon itself, is quite near in this particular town, making both trainers excited and especially having their experience with the legendary beast from the first arrival to the gym leader from the flying gym and deciding wanting to battle Suicune again and hopefully having Ash's rematch wanting for revenge for hurting his Lapras. As they're beginning to search out, discovering that they're not the only trainers around and desperately trying to find out where this Suicune could be. Unfortunately, finding out that Ash begins to notice there's another wild Pokemon and normally he has seen a few miles away, but this particular town seems to be quite empty as a huge explosion interrupts both of them as a tree landed uh, separating both of them. As unfortunately as the trainer begins to follow as Ash calls a Cassidy they will meet again just in a loop around as Ash goes that direction, leaving Casey to be on a home temporarily as the trainer and Ash begin to rush in and finally to see Suicune. But immediately the trainers around seems to be outmatched by this Suicune, and Ash doesn't even have an opportunity to battle because a lot of the trainers seems to really want to battle Suicune, which makes Suicune to disappear, making the trainer and Ash himself to be annoyed as they scattered around. And to quite some time as Ash managed to catch up the trainer, but they seems to be terrified and trying to ask what's been happening, but they just says one guy has been battling all of them, and to the point where they just didn't want to capture Suicune anymore. It seems like this guy is dead on set trying to capture him. As Ash tries to get as any further, as they just begin to scatter as all the train seems to run away back to town, leaving Ash perhaps the only one to find out how, as we plan to Suicune beginning to have a very tough battle against a tyrannical under commandments of the mass Marauder, as he's beginning to have a tiresome as he just wants to capture the Suicune already, as he's particularly being a very harsh trainer commanding for Tyranitar to end this now with a Hyper Beam, as Suicune had a previous battle with the other trainers and now having the same battle, but this time a very high level trainer and a Pokemon, as Tyranitar is beginning to actually push his limits and actually beginning to actually struggle a bit, as as the Mass Marauder is to be a very aggressive and not even trying to play nice. But luckily, as Ash is there to stop the Tyrannosaurus Hyper Beam, as Ash sends out Scissors to countercept it with a powerful bullet punch, as the Hyper Beam barely misses Suicune, which gives Suicune enough time to get away as the Mass Marauder yells at this boy for intervening. And Ash just simply gazes his eyes, looking on the R on his chest, as he is a member of Team Rocket, and Ash wanting some payback any information about the GS ball, but seemingly the robbing Gratis seems to that isn't too sure what Ash is talking about. He's just here for a simple job and he's not gonna let a brat to stop him, leaving the two trainers to get into a huge battle as Tyranical being a very powerful Pokemon and Ash not sure how to approach this pseudo legendary Pokemon, but it's immediately that Tyrannical is simply another level entirely, making it very difficult for Sizzle. And even fact as Tyrannical is being more aggressive than it should be for a Pokemon, and as trying to find out what did he did with his Pokemon, and the Master Mother isn't willing to say anything. He just simply said he just needed a stronger Pokemon, and just did whatever it took, including something that Ash would hate forever. As unfortunately, as Scizor is beginning to really struggle against the Tyranitar, and a psychic Pokemon known as Alakazam managed to stop Tyranitar with a powerful Focus Blast, as this is enough for Tyranitar to actually stagger a bit, and realizing Suicune is long over ran away, as he's pretty much wasting his time and just simply throws a smoke bomb as he just simply calls back his Tyrannical and simply disappeared. As Ash looks trying to find out where this guy is but finds to find nothing, as Ash once again is beginning to very angry and try and look to his right to see a trainer that he's Alakazam that helped Ash's sizzle. And finding out this guy has been trying to track down Suicune, but finding out that the matchmaker is being a very an unpleasant person to see, especially how he treated Suicune that he isn't a too fan of. As this trainer simply named, the name is Isine, and it's nice to meet you. As Casey is trying to find out this legendary Pokemon Suicune but having no trouble. In fact, as she accidentally stumbles upon a sim sort of campsite as a summer appears in those simply a cage with a big red R as Cassie mounts the steam rocket and remembering the previous event that she failed to protect everyone and let the GS walk on into the Team Rocket's head and wanting some redemption and hopefully getting Ash's good grace again as the brave girl simply enters the camp but finding out to her surprise that there is no one seems to be here and deciding to look around to see a bunch of cave of Pokemon inside of them and seemingly none of them seems to be very wild and looked at them very injuredly and Cassidy wanting to help the wild Pokemon as she simply lets go of most of the cages, but seems with the help of her Bailey with her Razor Leaf managing to get most of the Pokemon to get out of there. But one particular Pokemon, Electric, a baby Pokemon, seems to have the most troublesome because it's been attacked the most compared to the other Pokemon. As Cassidy desperately tries to grab the baby Pokemon that it seems is unable to help himself as the electric kid tries to get out of it, but Cassidy managed to calm down the electric Pokemon to the point where Electric seems to stop fighting and just allows Cassidy to carry him as she desperately tries to hide somewhere because she could sense someone arriving and seemingly it's the masked marauder returning and simply quite angry to see his campsite that he has been collecting Pokemon seem to disappear, making him very extremely angry to the point where he just slams his fist to the cage and an actually crack on his own way, making Cassidy very afraid. As similarly as the marauding captain is beginning to receive a call and just pulls out from his pocket and beginning to talk to a man that Cassidy has seen before as Giovanni is talking to him. As once he explains to his boss, as Giovanni seems to be very disappointed, but the one thing that the marauding can does manage to achieve, they did manage to put a location chip onto Sweet Coon, meaning that no matter how far it tries to run, they will always know where its location, no matter how far it got, as that was his mission all along, not trying to capture Suicune, but actually put a tracking device leaving Cassidy to be quite shocked as the marauding captain is simply gone onto his helicopter and beginning to fly off. As Cassidy trying to remember what the man just said, but quickly realized Elected is also in some critical damage, and thus tries to go back to the Pokemon Center and hopefully Ash is waiting there. After as Cassidy has managed to retrieve back the Pokemon Center, and she could clearly see a bunch of trainers going to the Nurse Joy as they're pretty stacked for most of the time, but Cassidy can clearly see that Ash is still there, and with a strange of some sort, they're discussing a deep matter. As once Cassidy meets Ash, as Ash is happy to see that Casey seems to be okay, as Ash introduces Casey with Eugene, as the both of them handshake each other, but and also as Ash explains that it's thanks to Eugene that allowed it Ash to avoid a great danger of a man called the Masked Marauder, as Cassidy did see him, as she explained what happened, as he's clearly with Team Rocket, and thanks to Cassidy seeing that clearly that he's under the orders of Giovanni, which made Ash's blood very boiled from that. As Eugene quickly see that Cassidy is holding a Pokemon that seems to be very injured, as he points this out, as Cassidy almost completely forgot about the Pokemon and quickly goes back to Nostritus. He tries to get it to heal up. As the two begin back on the conversation, as Eugene explained that he just came here to visit an old friend who seems to be the gym leader that Ash could discover from. As Ash wants to challenge him, as Eugene introduces Ash to Morty, who's been away of some sort with important matters of his clan. And once Eugene introduces Morty to Ash, as Morty thanks Eugene for watching over the village while he's away from time, as Morty seems to be interested that Ash came all the way from Kanto from here to battle, and that's what Ash is going to get with his battle with. As a day passes, as Ash faces Morty, as Morty faces Ash on a 3-on-3, as Morty sends out Gengar, and Ash, having experience with the Gengar species, knows how to deal with them as he sends out his Scizor to battle, feeling that this Gengar particularly could be a trouble for his whole team. As the battle begins immediately, as Scizor immediately uses a powerful bullet punch which square hits on Gengar, but unfortunately, as the ghost character a bit of a left and seemingly has disappeared, as Ash knows where it's going to attack, as Gengar appears behind Scizor's shadow and begins to punch a powerful shadow punch, but Scizor seems to catch it with a powerful X-Scissor, which does tremendous damage, as Morley is taking a bit surprised that Ash knows how to handle those types, as this continues on to the point where Gengar is getting a bit annoyed that he couldn't shake Scizor, making it to be quite irritated from it. But once Ash calls for Scizor to use a powerful bullet punch, as Scizor gets confused and tries to throw a punch, but simply can't do so because Gengar has activated its ability Close Body, which disables Scizor's ability using the move, allowing for Gengar to launch a powerful sucker punch, doing tremendous damage as Gengar is in the upper hand, launching powerful shadow punches after shadow punches, making Scizor to be frustrated to the point where it quickly powers up with a powerful sword stance, which unfortunately allows for Gengar to hit some powerful punches, as unfortunately as Scizor has the upper hand in landing a powerful X-Scissor, but unfortunately as Ash has entered a mistake as Gengar hits a powerful Hypnosis, which puts Scizor to sleep, making this very difficult for Ash and Scizor, as Morty commands for Gengar to use a powerful Dream Eater, as Gengar begins to pretty much absorb all the life force energy in Scizor's dream, but as Ash commands for Scizor to get up, as Scizor opened its eyes and managed to wake up from the cry of its trainer and landing a powerful bullet punch which does knock out Gengar, leaving Morty to be taken aback because normally that tactic normally wins in most of the battle, forcing Morty to recall Gengar and begin to approach this very difficultly. As Morty has to send out his newer Pokemon in battle, sending out a Corsola to battle, as Ash begins to see a very different Pokemon entirely. He's seen these before, but they seem to be very differently, as Ash could pull out his Pokemon and finding out this Pokemon seems to be in a different region, but completely different, making Ash very particularly interested, but unfortunately has to focus on the battle, as Scissor begins to continue the battle with a powerful X Scissor, but Corsola seems to take the damage very gratefully, being a very defensive one, as Corsola launches a powerful liquidation, doing very hard damage, but not to the point where Scissor is phased by it, but it does notice it is a bit stronger than expected, as Ash commands to knock this out quick with a powerful X Scissor, but unfortunately, as Corsola pretty much let the attack hit it, making Ash and Scissor confused until Modi reveals a powerful mirror coat and begins to launch the attack back to Sizzle, which immediately all that power doubles it back to Scissor, which unfortunately is have enough power to knock out the Steel type, forcing Ash to recall it and quickly had to suss the situation, realizing this is going to be very tough, but having faith, sending out Zatu, as even though Zatu and Ash doesn't seems to agree on a lot of things, but what Ash could use thought to here is sort of dig when and how Morty is going to use that one move, because Ash would know for a fact that one move would be particularly troublesome for both of them, as two could simply nod in agreement. As Morty simply uses Strength Step as immediately as Coulson attacks to unguarded, as beginning to absorb some of the health that it just took it. But Zatu managed to launch a powerful air slash that does solid damage, but realizing Ash has to be clever than that, as Corsola simply attacks with a powerful Shadow Ball, and this time as Zatu this time tries to dodge out of the way, knowing that it will be very effective against it until Morty begins to call up a powerful Will-O-Wisp, as this does unfortunately hit Zatu, but Ash knows for a fact that Zatu was allowing it to attack that on purpose, leaving Morty to be confused until Zatu launches its hidden ability synchronization, as the opponent is beginning to have the same effect thanks to its ability, leaving Morty to be very an idiot for making that mistake, as both Pokemon are running down the clock. But unfortunately, as Coach Select could simply destroy itself thanks to Strength Step, but Zatu doesn't need to worry because Coach Select still needs to hurry up and attack, because Zatu knows for a fact that Corsa just at the Scissor, leaving the tanky Pokemon to be very tiresome until Zatu launches a powerful Psychic, which is enough for it to knock out Corsola in the battle, leaving Morty with just one more Pokemon, but not have to worry because he has knowing that he doesn't need to worry about the auto as much because it's still pretty much burned, and sending out perhaps his toughest Pokemon and sending out Fluttermane to battle, as Ash can just sends the very weird something from the Pokemon that not just because it's a ghost type but very honest in a very weird way, as he tries to pull out his Pokedex and finding out not much about the data, meaning that it's a new Pokemon that the Pokemon Dex doesn't seem to know, but Ash is not going to be that afraid against an unknown Pokemon. As the battle continues, launch a powerful Psychic, but Flutter Mane with incredible speed, but shocks as Zato to the point where it launches a powerful Moonblast, which took Zato off of the air and crash landed on the battlefield, as Zato is beginning to fly, and it managed to hurt his wing, making Zato much more slow because of its injured wing. As Ash, knowing that Zato is pretty much good as done, as Johto simply launches a powerful future sight, which unfortunately does get hit by Shadow Bomb, making it to be knocked out in a battle. As Ash could tell that Johto didn't have much option on winning, so he set out for the next one and sending out a Pokemon that should give him the advantage and sending out as Ash sends out his newest Pokemon, sending out Spot to battle, and being a normal type should avoid Flutterman's ghost typing as Ash calls for a call as Spot begins to heighten its defense with this move, but unfortunately as Ash will find out that Flutterman seems to hit much harder than expected as it just simply launches a powerful Moon Blast, which certainly does affect Spot to the point where it quickly retaliates with a powerful ancient power as it slams all the rocks into Flutterman while Flutterman seems to move out of the way, but unexpectedly as Sunspot simply gets an ancient power army boost as all of it says is simply boosted as Ash didn't expect to have the army boost that lucky as Ash quickly points out the Pokédex and finding out it has a ability called Serene Grace which has a likely chance to hit the extra effect from the move is Ash having a very devilish idea as he commands for Dunsparce to use ancient power over and over again, as unfortunately it couldn't hit Flutterman, but it does hit Flutterman a few times as Dunsparce is beginning again another army boost as all its set begins to increase tenfold because of it and is actually getting to an upper hand against Fluttermane to the point where Mori can sense it's going to be very difficult as he doesn't want to do the spot call for a powerful perish song, meaning that the battlefield will end in less than 3 turns. As Ash if Ash doesn't knock off Fluttermane before it does, could leave him to be the loser here, as commanding for Dunsparce to use a powerful Dragon Rush, but to his surprise, as Fluttermane seems to be very ineffective from the attack or launching a powerful Moonblast, as this actually hurts Dunsparce, as Marjorie points out that Fluttermane is part fairy type to Ash disappointment that he should have seen something like this, but not too worried as he commands the momentum of Dragon Rush with a powerful drill run, as Sunspool turns around as he points the end of its tail to strike a powerful strike against Fluttermane, where it's a critical hit, and thanks to all the army boost that it just gained, as this managed to knock off Fluttermane before the final 2 turn has ended, leaving Ash to be the victor and earning his third badge in Johto.